But yes, absolutely. I'm glad he's paused it. I'm glad he's reviewing it.
But how can Sorry, Vanessa. How can you say that you're glad he's paused it when you've just spent the last 2 or 3 minutes explaining what the difficulties are going to be?
A brand new Prime Minister, 3 days into the job, and he's already reversing one of Labour's own flagship policies. Thousands of prisoners were due to walk free next month. Now suddenly, that's on ice. But here's where it gets messy. Even the people who wanted this paused can't agree on what happens next. One guest tells LBC she's thrilled it's been stopped, then spends the next 2 minutes explaining why stopping it is a disaster. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why Britain's prison system is about to hit a wall and why nobody in Westminster has a real answer. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because we break down these clashes every single day.
He has announced today that they're going to pause the scheme, which was due to start in September, to release prisoners early to reduce prison overcrowding. He's paused it pending a review. Now, you just heard at the start of the programme there a quote from Jake Richards, the Justice Minister, who was a Justice Minister under Keir Starmer, and was touring the studios telling us what a great scheme this was and how it was absolutely vital. It was started under Shabana Mahmood when she was Justice Secretary and then continued under David Lammy. And yet now it's being paused. Now, I offer no opinion on whether it's right, well, at least at this stage, on whether it's right to pause this scheme, because I think it is quite clear that the prisons in our country are vastly overcrowded. There was about to be a point, I think, earlier this year where we wouldn't have had any places left for new prisoners. So clearly something needed to be done. Now, I hope that Andy Burnham recognises the consequences of pausing this scheme, because it seems a little inconsistent when you have a Labour government 1 week saying this is absolutely crucial for the future of the prison system, and then the next week, the same Labour government, admittedly under a new Prime Minister and a new Justice Secretary, saying we're going to pause it. We are now Thursday, 3 days after Andy Burnham became Prime Minister. How could they possibly have done the work to justify making such a radical decision? But on the face of it, it will be a popular thing, because I think some of the newspaper headlines that we've seen over the last few days, when we look at the killers of Andrew Harper, that 2 of them are set to be freed early. When we look at the newspaper headlines, it's quite clear what most of the tabloid newspapers think. And I think they probably reflect a lot of their readers' opinion, saying, no, these people should not be released early. They deserve to stay in prison. And certainly with these lot, I completely agree with that. But it's all very well standing on principle and saying, well, I don't think these kind of people should be released from prison early, unless you have an alternative to put forward. And it doesn't seem to me that anybody has the alternative to put forward. Maybe you do. 0345 6060 973. Is this one of those decisions that Andy Burnham has made in haste and is going to repent at leisure? He's reduced bus fares, which obviously people are going to think that's a great thing to do, but doesn't seem to have any clue where the money's going to come from to pay for it. And there have been other announcements over the last 3 days, which on the face of it are quite popular announcements. But do they stack up? Is there an answer to the question, where's the beef? Where's the research that's gone into announcing these new policies? To say that you're concerned about the cost of living is all very well. Everybody's concerned about the cost of living. But when you keep announcing things that are going to help, well, this sector of the community, that sector of the community, inevitably all of those things are going to cost money. And we all know that there isn't any money. So where is it going to come from? I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe you do. 0345 6060 973. Well, let's talk. Within the last hour, my LBC colleague, Tom Swarbrick, spoke with the Justice Minister, Jake Richards. We mentioned him earlier on. We just heard a little clip of him earlier. We're going to hear a little bit more of him now. He set out why Andy Burnham has suddenly halted this policy and why Sir Keir Starmer's government introduced it in the first place.
We have prison capacity issues. Now, I can talk about those, the fact that the Tories closed 23 prisons, they only built 500 places in 14 years, a complete disaster of a legacy. So we have capacity issues. But at the same time, of course, there are understandable concerns from victims about offenders being let out earlier than they might otherwise be. Now, that's the balancing act that a Prime Minister and a Justice Secretary, and indeed me, as a junior Justice Minister, have to strike. Now, of course, that's something that you review over time, that a new Prime Minister in particular has to take a real grip of and have a look at, and that's what we're doing. And I think, again, your listeners and your viewers will understand, Tom, that when there is a new regime, when there is a new Prime Minister, it's natural and indeed sensible and common sense to have a look at these things again. So we paused it. There is a time pressure, there is some urgency to this, but paused it while we're taking stock.
Fine. You see, what isn't natural is keeping Jake Richards in his job. Frankly, I'm not saying he should have been sacked, but I think it would have probably been a good idea to move him. Because last week, he would have come on the programme and said exactly the opposite to what he just told Tom Swarbrick there. That's what people despise about our political classes, isn't it? That they can speak with forked tongue. Jake Richards is, I think, a good minister. He's a nice guy. But they shouldn't have sent him out there today to do this, should they? They need to get a grip of their comm strategy. I mean, that's part of the problem of the Starmer government, and it seems to be afflicting this government too. Well, let's see what former governor of Wormwood Scrubs Prison and the author of the book The Governor, who's now Reform UK's Justice Advisor, thinks of this. Vanessa Frake-Harris, welcome to the programme. Do you agree that this scheme should be paused, and if not, why not?
Good evening, Ian. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Let's turn the clock back, say, 6 months when the Sentencing Act was going through passage. Opposition MPs put forward amendments explicitly designed to block rapists, child groomers, sex offenders from being eligible to the early release. All of those Labour politicians, including the one you've just had on, voted against that because they looked at, well, prison beds are more important than releasing violent offenders back into the community. Now, of course, it's a new Prime Minister who, in my opinion, wants to be popular and has paused it. So, as per usual, this will create a huge crisis, not only within the prison service, but also the probation service. Many of the prisoners who were due to be released on the 2nd of September will have had their sentence calculations done, will have had all their probation checks done. And bearing in mind that for one prisoner, the probation checks can last from 6 to 8 weeks. That includes where they're going to live, what they're going to do, when they're going to report, all of that sort of thing. So it's a huge, huge thing for Andy Burnham to turn around now and say, well, hang on a minute, let's pause it. We're going to review it. We're going to review it with the Justice Secretary, the new Justice Secretary, Alex Norris, who I'm afraid to say has no experience, that is none experience within the justice system at all, has no idea how the justice system works. And I'm afraid to say the junior minister isn't much better, quite honestly. But yes, absolutely. I'm glad he's paused it. I'm glad he's reviewing it.
But how can Sorry, Vanessa. How can you say that you're glad he's paused it when you've just spent the last 2 or 3 minutes explaining what the difficulties are going to be?
Well, of course there's going to be difficulties because the Starmer government strolled right through it and said, no, this is happening. We don't care that there's rapists, violent offenders, sexual offenders going to be released early on licence. We don't care. What's more important to us is the beds that they're going to release. Never mind to say how many of those are actually ready for release. Never mind how many are going to commit further crimes, probably worse crimes, and end up back in jail. So, yeah, I am glad he's paused it. But who has to pick that up? It's going to be the prison service and the probation service.
But I was reading an article this morning that said if this goes ahead, by the 1st of November, there will be no prison places left. So, yes, my heart says you're absolutely right, and I don't want these people to be released at all. But aren't you just sort of putting the problem down the line? Because in November, if the courts can't send violent criminals to prison because there are no places left, I mean, what's going to happen to them? I mean, it's a complete muddle, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is, but it's a muddle of the Labour government. And to be honest, there are things that can happen. We can release all the non-violent offenders on early release. I haven't got a problem with that. But what I have got a problem with is the likes of the two killers of PC Harper being released early, doing 50% of a 13-year sentence, 6 years, 6 months. I do have a problem with that. In the first instant, a prison is supposed to protect the public. Releasing people like that early is not protecting the public. Releasing prisoners like that back into our communities is not protecting the public.
Now here's the part nobody's talking about: the people who actually have to make this work on the ground. Probation officers were only told which prisoners were coming out days ago. So what happens when the government pulls the rug out with barely any warning? This next voice will tell you exactly why that's a problem.
Well, Tanya Bassett joins me now, who I think has a rather different take on this. She's from the Probation Officers Trade Union, NAPO, who is herself a former probation officer. Tanya, I don't know how much of what Vanessa said you would agree with, but presumably the fact that this is a complete muddle, you would agree with that.
Hi, Ian. Yes. I mean, we have to look at this in the bigger picture, in that we have an overly punitive penal policy at the moment. And as on principle, NAPO would like to see some significant changes, because we know the evidence shows that probation is more effective at reducing reoffending than prison is. And so there has to be more effective practice in the community in order to reduce reoffending and therefore protect the public.
For everyone, including violent offenders?
Yes. I mean, it's across the board in terms of that. You have to be able to do that work in the community and environment that you live in. The situation we're talking about is we've spent the last 6 months consulting and negotiating and engaging with HMPPS about this new Sentencing Act and the changes it brings in. Our members were only told last week, maybe the week before, which people were coming out early. And so they've had a very truncated period of time in order to do the pre-release work. And in some complex cases, and that doesn't necessarily mean risk of harm, you would want up to 2 and 3 months in order to do that in terms of accommodation, etc. So we're already working on a very truncated period. What the Prime Minister has done has now paused that and potentially made that even less time for our members to make robust release plans. And I hope if the Prime Minister decides that he wants to go ahead with this, which I believe Number 10 have said they might do in September, that he at least pushes it back a couple of weeks in order to enable our members to do their job properly. Because probation is in a workload crisis, and that has been the case for 2 years. We have constantly picked up the extra work from prison overcrowding, which obviously is an issue, but probation is beyond capacity. Our members are working ridiculous hours in order to do their day-to-day work. So anything like this really has a significant impact on them. Bearing in mind it's the summer holidays, we know that attendance at work because of annual leave drops to almost 50% of staff. It was always very bad timing, and we advised HMPPS not to do it over the summer. But ultimately, this is actually now adding to their stress. And in order for people to come out of prison early, it has to be done safely. And my concern is the Prime Minister has made a knee-jerk reaction to a couple of comments and also the PC Harper case, which I'm not undermining. It was a heinous crime. But we have to have a justice system that isn't knee-jerk. We have to have a government that doesn't respond to every single thing in a knee-jerk reaction and actually sits back and takes the time to look at things. And I'm concerned that that isn't happening.
Tanya, thank you. That's Tanya Bassett there from the Probation Officers Trade Union, NAPO. Well, you've heard the arguments for both sides there. Which side do you fall down on? Do you think this scheme should go ahead as planned on the 2nd of September? Do you agree with Tanya that it ought, if they do go ahead with it, it needs to be postponed to give probation officers enough time to do the work that they have to do? But I mean, I'm not sure this is a very good sign, is it? That Andy Burnham, at the first sign of gunfire, comes out with something that he probably knows the majority of the electorate will support without actually thinking through the consequences. I think that's quite worrying. Susie on Twitter, she says, I was thinking about what Anne Widdecombe would have done to increase prison places, and I remembered she wanted to create more prison spaces rather than let people out early. And then she's got she sent me a little graphic, and these are the three things that Anne Widdecombe suggested. And this was back when she was Prisons Minister back in 1996-7, where she said, take over disused holiday camps to convert them into low-security prisons with temporary accommodation, using porter cabins from decommissioned Norwegian oil rigs as additional prison space, borrowing a prison ship from the United States to create extra spaces in the prison system. Has anybody even thought, I mean, I'm not sure any of those would work nowadays necessarily, but has anybody really thought about that? Because the key is, yes, to change the sentencing structure in our justice system, but also, if you run out of prison spaces, you can create them relatively easily and relatively quickly. Maybe not tens of thousands, but certainly you could find a few hundred here and there, I would have thought, using ideas like that. Or not. 0345 6060 973. And what does this decision tell us about Andy Burnham's style of leadership? I mean, if he does go down this road of not just pausing the scheme, but abandoning it, and we get to the beginning of November and there are no prison places and the courts are clogged up with people who have been sentenced to many, many years in prison, but they can't find a space for them, what happens then? I wish I knew the answer to that question. Mick is in Leeds. Hello, Mick.
Ian, how are you?
Good, thank you. What would you like to say?
Palmer's early release scheme was doomed to fail from the outset. To release violent criminals early into society, especially those criminals who killed a police officer, up in the face for serving police officers who are out there trying to protect us.
Yeah.
What he should have done is, he should have said, there are 2/3 of prisoners that are low-level, non-violent, 50,000 potential prisoners, non-violent, that they could release early. And they chose to ignore that. Completely out of touch with the public, and shows how incompetent he was as a Prime Minister. Andy Burnham's done the right thing to review it, and hopefully he will say there will be low-level, non-violent criminals that will be released into the community. To add to that, he could say, well, they're going to serve the rest of the sentence doing community service, for example, clearing fly tipping, which will save the taxpayer billions, and they could pay back to society. So just a bit of common sense and a bit of respect for public safety wouldn't go amiss.
I agree with that 100%. It's something I've been saying probably for the last 10 or 15 years on this programme, that people are being sent to prison for short sentences, which, yes, it punishes them, but you can't certainly be rehabilitated within 6 months or a year. And a lot of these offences, in terms of being a danger to society, most of these people are not a danger to society, although you could argue that having then spent time in prison, they become a danger to society because of what tricks that they learn in prison. So I totally agree with you that there are many ways that we can punish people. We can tag people, we can curfew people, we can fine people, we can get them to do community service. There are all sorts of different ways that people can pay their debt to society. And yet we are in a situation now where people who've been convicted of violent offences are going to be let out. That is a scandal. You can't just blame Labour for that. This has been going on for years under the Conservatives as well. They didn't do any better. But we've got to get to a point where our prison system is viable. At the moment, I think we have about 87,000 people in prison. That is down a little bit, but not down enough. In 1993, I think when Michael Howard became Home Secretary, there were 44,000 people in prison. Now, Mick, do you believe that we have become a much more criminal country over the last 20 years? Because I do not.
I don't think we have, but I just think we're just too quick to put people into prison. And what's happened, Ian, is because we've done that, we don't have enough prison places. And do you know how much it costs to build a new prison cell, just one prison cell? £100,000. Now, that is completely and utterly morally wrong when we've got people going to food banks and people can't afford to heat and feed children. It's just wrong. And again, Ian, it's just a lack of common sense and understanding of, walking in the public shoes. These they've got no idea, no clue. And what's even worse is not one of them went against this new policy when it went through Parliament.
No.
And that is a serious concern.
Mick, thank you very much indeed for your call.
So there you have it, a Prime Minister who's been in the job less than a week, already tearing up a policy his own party pushed through Parliament. Popular? Almost certainly. Thought through? That's a different question entirely. Because if this scheme doesn't restart soon, prisons run out of space by November, and then it's the courts, the police, and probation left picking up the pieces of a decision made in a hurry. Do you think Andy Burnham did the right thing pausing this, or is he just kicking the problem down the road? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more of these breakdowns as British politics unravels in real time, make sure you're subscribed.